I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, Adnan Syed is guilty. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my focused co-host, Alice.
Hey, Brett. Tonight, I will be focused. Though we spent many hours discussing this case, not today. Today, you get just the facts.
That's right, and that's what this is all about. We did 14 episodes on this. We get it. That's a lot. A lot of you didn't want to sit through that. And right now, with this case, is a really important time. You're going to be hearing all sorts of stuff about Adnan Syed. You're going to be bombarded with information that he's innocent, and we want to present to you the other side. So this is going to be a little different for a couple reasons. Number one, it's ad-free, so congratulations. If you got through whatever ads are automatically added at the beginning of an episode, it's just us talking from here on out. That's the first thing. The second thing, we're going to post this script on our website, and we're doing that because the factual statements we're going to make are footnoted, and you will be able, by either looking at the footnotes themselves or clicking on the links, to see the actual parts of the record that back up what we're telling you. We always tell you, go to the record, and I get it. It's a 2,000-page record, so that's a little bit much of an ask. This should allow you to really focus in, read what we link to, read what's around it too, get the full, what's the word I'm looking for? Context of this evidence, and decide for yourself whether or not you think what we are telling you is true or not. Obviously, we'll also be offering some opinions. Those won't be footnoted. But for the majority of the facts, unless they're basically undisputed, which some are, we are going to give you the evidence in the easiest way possible for you to find it. With that, Alice, is there anything else you want to say before we dive in?
Let's go ahead and dive into the evidence.
Let's do it. And those of you who've heard us do these episodes before, obviously, we spent 14 episodes on this. There won't be everything in this episode. There won't be all the evidence of Adnan's guilt in this episode. If you want to hear everything, listen to the 14 episodes. There also won't be the things, or a lot of the things, that people argue is possibly exculpatory. If you want to know why touch DNA on shoes found in a trunk does not exonerate someone, you need to listen to our longer podcast, or just use your common sense on that one. But the various arguments that are made about why Adnan Syed is not guilty, we're not going to address most of them. This is mostly the evidence for his guilt. So that's enough talking. Let's dive in. So Adnan Syed and Heyman Lee dated for quite some time, starting around March 1998. They'd stay together for the next 9 months or so, though they broke up twice during that period. These breakups sprang from Hay's feeling that she was losing herself in the relationship, and from the complications their differing religions created, particularly for Adnan. But these breakups didn't last. A few days after each, Hay was back to writing in her diary how much she loved Adnan. When they broke up again on December 21st, 1998, Adnan probably had every reason to believe they'd get back together. On Christmas, after all, they were exchanging expensive Christmas gifts.
But something had changed. Hay had fallen for another boy, Don Clindist. Hay and Don had gone on their first date on January 1st, 1999. By January 9th, they are AOL Instant Messenger official, with Hay updating her public profile to read interests, movies, phone, partying, TV, music, and most importantly, Don. Likes, looking in his blue-gray eyes, fast cars with his Camaro, driving to Bel Air, selling glasses in her beauty, spending as much time as possible in the lab. Occupation, part-time sales, full-time girlfriend. Quote, I love you and I miss you, Donnie.
2 days later, on January 11th, Adnan had his friend, Bilal Ahmed, buy him a cell phone. The next day, he activates it. He makes a call to Jay Wilds and 3 calls to Hay. The next day, January 13th, someone will murder Hay. The next morning, Adnan tells his friend Krista Lynn Myers that he is going to ask Hayman Lee for a ride after school. She later overhears this conversation and hears Hay say she will give Adnan a ride. She recalls Adnan either saying his car was in the shop or his brother, who worked at a tire store, had it. That evening, after Hay disappears, Adnan will tell Officer Adcock that Hay was supposed to give him a ride, but she'd already left by the time he got to their designated meeting place. He told Krista the same thing. From that point forward, Adnan will deny ever asking Hay for a ride. Others will claim that Hay later told Adnan she couldn't take him, but if she did, Adnan has never said that, even to Officer Adcock.
At 11 o'clock a.m. that day, Adnan and Jay Wilds get together. They go to the mall to pick up a birthday present for Jay's girlfriend and Adnan's good friend, Stephanie. During this trip, Jay will say that Adnan discussed killing Hay because she broke his heart. Jay thought he was blowing off steam. Sometime around 1 o'clock, Jay drops Adnan back off at school. Adnan leaves his phone and his car with Jay. The cell phone will make and receive phone calls from that point forward. Those calls, both who they are to and from, and the location of the phone when they were made, will be crucial to the prosecution's case. Everyone agrees that the location data for outgoing phone calls is accurate. Some dispute the location data for incoming calls, and Adnan's attorneys were even able to convince a judge to discount their accuracy. This is a fallacy. As our interview with FBI cast agent Jay Burney confirmed, there is no scientific or technical reason why incoming calls were less reliable than outgoing calls for determining the location of the cell phone.
After arriving back at school, Adnan goes to the guidance counselor's office to pick up a letter he needs for his college education. At least one student will later say she saw Adnan at the guidance counselor's office after, rather than during, school, providing a potential alibi. But the student, Debbie Warren, acknowledged at the time that she couldn't be certain about when exactly she saw Adnan or what day she was remembering. The one person who has never said he went to the guidance counselor's office after school is Adnan himself. In fact, in 2 different timelines he created for his defense team, he places himself at the guidance counselor's office after Jay dropped him off and before he went to his final class of the day. And, in fact, he was late for that class, arriving around 1:30. At 2:15, school lets out. Hay is supposed to pick up her cousin at her school sometime after 3. And this school will alert her family around 3:30 that Hay had not yet arrived. Adnan will tell Serial that there's no way he would have asked Hay for a ride because she never did anything after school. Quote, I wouldn't have asked her for a ride after school. I'm sure that I didn't ask her because, well, immediately after school, because I know anyone who knows her knows, she always goes to pick up her little cousin. So she's not doing anything for anyone right after school. No matter what, trips to McDonald's, not a trip to 7-Eleven, she took that very seriously. But in his statement to his defense team, which were confidential until well after Serial aired, Adnan confirmed that he and Hay would indeed go to the Best Buy after school, but before she picked up her cousin, to have sex in the secluded side parking lot. The file reads, since Hay was responsible for picking up her niece after school, they would have sex in the Best Buy parking lot close to the school after school. Hay would leave to get her niece, and they would see one another that night when they would have sex again. Sometime between 2:15 and 3:30, Hay was abducted and murdered.
At 2:30, Asia McLean sees Adnan at the library right next to school. At 2:40, Asia leaves and Adnan is still there. By 3:15, Adnan's cell phone is pinging the tower and sector covering the Best Buy just west of school, the same Best Buy where Adnan and Hay often went to have sex. Jay Wilds would later say that he met Adnan there, and Adnan showed him Hay's dead body in the trunk of her car. The Best Buy was first mentioned to police by Jen Pusateri, who said Jay told her Adnan had murdered Hay in the Best Buy parking lot. Jen Pusateri's statements are important because they were made to police before they brought Jay in to question him about the murder. Jen relays that Jay told her the story of what happened to Hay on the day Hay went missing and immediately after, well before Jay could have possibly been influenced by the police. Furthermore, Jen's statements were made in the presence of her mother and a lawyer. At 3:32, the cell phone calls Nisha Tana's phone. Nisha was a girl Adnan had met on New Year's and to whom he was talking on the phone as part of a burgeoning relationship. Nisha will tell police that she remembered Adnan calling her a day or two after he got his cell phone. He put Jay Wilds on the phone with her. It was a short call. Jay would tell police he remembered Adnan putting him on the phone with some girl from Silver Spring, which is indeed where Nisha lived. Nisha would say that she thought they were on their way to Jay's job at a video store at the time. But this wouldn't fit, as Jay didn't start the job until later. But given the other facts, it is more likely that she confused this one detail than that she confused all the corroborating facts. Moreover, to discount the call, you'd have to believe that Nisha just so happened to remember the call happening when Adnan's phone just so happened to have called her.
And Jay and Nisha were not the only ones who say that Adnan called Nisha that day. Adnan's brother Ali, whose full name is Tanveer Ali Syed, would tell Adnan's defense team in a document entitled Interview with Adnan's Brother, Ali, that around 3:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, Adnan had called Nisha. It is unclear exactly where he got this information, but the most plausible answer is that Adnan told him this at the time he still believed he could rely on Jay to be his alibi. As long as Jay does not turn on Adnan, the Nisha call provides an alibi for Adnan at around the time of the murders. It only becomes problematic once Jay tells police that Adnan killed Hay. At 3:59, the cell phone calls a friend of Jay's. It is pinging the Woodlawn High School tower and sector. This is consistent with Jay calling someone after dropping Adnan off at track practice. According to the testimony of the track coach, Coach Sy, track practice started at 4 p.m., and not just that day, every day. This was confirmed by another member of the track team who told Serial that track practice started at 4 p.m. Adnan's team has attempted to push the start of track practice back to 3:30 based on a statement by Sy that he would arrive at the track at around 3:30. But when the coach arrived to get ready for practice is not the same thing as when track practice began. The former doesn't matter unless you're trying to establish Sy's alibi. But if you want to know when track practice generally started, that's easy, 4 p.m.
At practice, Adnan had a conversation with Coach Sy. It would be the most in-depth conversation they would ever have. If Adnan wanted to make sure that he was noticed at practice that day, he'd succeeded. This is consistent with the statement of Jen Pusateri that, quote, Jay took him to maybe some kind of practice. Jay Wilds would also tell police Adnan wanted to be at track practice to create an alibi. In fact, it was Adnan who told police about the conversation and that it occurred on the 13th. Jay picked Adnan up again, and Adnan later received a call from both Young Lee and Officer Adcock, revealing that Hay was missing and people were looking for her. Jay would tell police that at this point, Adnan said they needed to bury Hay.
At 7:09, Jen Pusateri called the cell phone. Adnan answered and told her that Jay was busy and he'd call her back. This call pinged the tower and sector covering the burial site in Leakin Park. 7 minutes later, another call came in. This call also pinged the tower covering the burial site. In the time between that night and when Adnan was arrested, the cell phone would ping off this tower and in this sector, L689B, only one other time, at 4:44 p.m., January 27th, the day after Jay was arrested for an unrelated incident the night before. At 8:04, the cell phone makes an outgoing call to Jen's pager. It is pinging the tower over the location where Hay's car was dumped. At 8:05, the cell phone makes a call to Jen's pager again, now pinging the tower just west of the dump site, indicating that the phone is moving away from the dump location. Jen will later tell police, with her lawyer and mother in the room, that after these pages, she met Jay and Adnan in a mall parking lot. After Adnan leaves, Jay tells her what happened and she helps him dispose of evidence.
The basic story Jay tells Jen and that she relays to the police before the police interrogate Jay and before there's any evidence they're aware of Jay and his involvement with the case is largely consistent with the same story Jay will tell the police later. The key points: that Adnan left the car and cell phone with Jay, that he killed Hay because she broke his heart, Jay seeing the body, that Adnan strangled Hay, that Jay dropped Adnan off at school so he could be seen at practice, that Adnan buried Hay, though Jay lied to Jen and said he wasn't with Adnan at the time, that Jay called the cell phone and Adnan answered, that Jen picked up Jay after the burial, are all contained in Jen's statement. In fact, it was Jen and not Jay who first mentioned the murder happened at the Best Buy, the same Best Buy where Adnan's phone pinged around the time of the murder, and the same Best Buy where Adnan and Hay would go to have sex in a secluded parking lot where people would not see them. Facts that could not have been known to Jen at the time. A good place to have sex, and a good place to commit a murder. And Jen didn't remember the date all this happened, but she remembered it was the only day Adnan's cell phone ever called her. January 13th.
If the story was created by the police, then it was created for Jen first and fed to her with her lawyer and mother present. It was manufactured with details that would eventually match the cell phone ping evidence it's unlikely the police even understood fully, if at all, at the time of this interview. But it was also manufactured with inconsistent details as well, even though the police would have told both Jen and Jay the story, that Hay was killed at the Best Buy, which Jen told police but Jay omitted, and that Jay helped bury Hay, a fact Jay apparently lied to Jen about but was forthright with the police about. If the police manufactured the story, why these key inconsistencies? And finally, you'd have to believe Jen's lawyer and her mother allowed Jen to repeat this police-fabricated and fed story, even though it implicated her in covering up a murder. To this day, Jen has never said that the police fed her the story of what happened that night. She maintains that Jay told her the story, whether he made it up or not.
And this is the key. While much effort has been put into debunking Jay, Jen told the basic story first. If this story were fabricated, if it were made up, it wasn't the police who did it. They didn't feed Jay the key pieces. He'd already given them to Jen. Yes, Jay lies, and yes, there are things he says that are inconsistent with what Jen says. But the major beats are all there. And most importantly of all, Jay took police to the one piece of evidence they desperately needed: Hay's car. Jay could only have known where Hay's car was located in one of four scenarios. He killed Hay and dumped it himself, which would seem to implicate Adnan since they were together most of the day. Number 2, he stumbled upon it innocently, which is unlikely in and of itself, and even more unlikely that he would recognize this random sedan as Hay's vehicle. Third, the police led him to it, which requires a multi-officer conspiracy and an apparent willingness on law enforcement's part to leave the most valuable piece of evidence they could possibly have, Hay's car, out in the elements and in the middle of the city where it could be stolen, vandalized, or just through the process of time and weather lose potential evidence. And the police did so after they'd already fabricated the story, apparently crossing their fingers that no evidence in the car would make it abundantly clear to everyone that Adnan was not guilty and someone else was responsible. But despite this thoroughgoing conspiracy, the police forgot to do something as simple as plant damning evidence of Adnan's involvement in the murder in the car. Or the simple answer is this: Jay knew where the car was because he was with Adnan when they dumped it.
When the police processed the car, they found a map book that Hay kept in the driver's side door. But it wasn't in the door. It was in the back seat, open with the map page for Leakin Park torn out. Adnan's fingerprints were on that map book. But that's not the only place his fingerprints appeared. On top of the map book, the one that ordinarily stayed in the front driver's side and shouldn't have even been in the back seat, was what a property list described as a, quote, rose and baby's breath wrapped. In the book, Adnan's Story by Rabia Chaudhry, what the police found is described as a, quote, dried rose and baby's breath in a wrapper. In addition to the rose, baby's breath, and floral paper, flower food, the kind sold with roses, was also in the back seat. At trial, a fingerprint analyst, Sharon Talmadge, testified about the floral paper. The trial testimony reads, "Okay, now, from its size and shape, does it not appear to be paper and tissue that may have once surrounded flowers? Yes. You can't tell from your examination if, in fact, it did, could you? There were a little bit of stems, flower stems, and things that were inside there laying around it. That corroborated your impression that there were once flowers in there, correct? That's correct. But you couldn't tell from your examination what those flowers were, could you? No, they were dead. And on this floral paper that once surrounded a single rose, found sitting on top of the misplaced map book, Adnan Syed's fingerprints."
The only way Jay could know where the car was located was if he was with Adnan when he dropped it off. Jay killed Hay alone, or the police told him where the car was. If Jay killed Hay, it's hard to imagine how Adnan wasn't involved somehow, given how much they were together that day. And to believe the police told him where it was, you'd have to believe that the police, for reasons that are entirely unclear, decided to frame Adnan and use a black man from Baltimore with a criminal record as their star witness, hoping against hope when they made this decision that Adnan didn't have a rock-solid alibi, or that when they processed the car, definitive evidence of the killer wouldn't be present. They also had to hope that Jay would never break, not at the time, and not even after the case became famous, and he had every incentive in the world to be the hero who freed Adnan and pointed the finger at the corrupt police as the bad guys.
And you'd have to believe not only that, you'd have to believe an incredible number of coincidences. Adnan Syed just so happened to activate his phone, the same phone he left with Jay the day before Hay disappeared. He just so happened to tell a friend that his car was in the shop, a lie, and that he was going to ask Hay for a ride on the day she and her car disappeared. He just happened to tell a police officer that he'd asked Hay for a ride that morning, but had missed her after school, and then just so happened to deny that statement for the rest of time. Jen just so happened to say that the murder was committed at Best Buy, the same Best Buy where Adnan and Hay had sex after school before she'd pick up her cousin. Jen just so happened to mention Jay dropping Adnan at practice, the same practice that started at 4 o'clock, the same time Adnan's phone pinged off the Woodlawn Tower when Jay called one of his friends. The Nisha call just so happened to occur at the exact time in the exact place where it would need to have occurred if Jay's story was true. Adnan's cell phone just so happened to ping over the murder site, the original car dump site, the burial site, and the final car dump site at exactly the times you would expect if Jay's story were true. Jay just so happened to know where Hay's car was, presumably because the police told him where it was, and that location just so happened to line up with the cell phone pings and the rest of the story we described above. And when the car was opened, in the back seat was a map book that shouldn't be there, with a rose wrapped in floral paper on top of it, both of which just so happened to have Adnan's fingerprints on them. What a coincidence. And there you have it. And I don't know, how long did that take, Alice? 20 minutes?
20 minutes. And here's the thing. We've recited in narrative form, but there are a lot of footnotes. A lot of you have heard us talk about our love of footnotes. The footnotes here give you all of the links to all of the evidence. Go read it for yourself. We always tell you to go read the evidence for yourself. We've tried to present the evidence as the case is here. Obviously, there's more, but all of it can be found online and in those links. So read it for yourself. Don't take our word for it. But all I have to say is the conviction was a good conviction. The evidence at trial supports the conviction, and despite all the smoke that's been blowing since then, there has been no evidence that's come forward. Hard evidence, not just claims of evidence or claims of suspects or claims of other types of alibi that defeats the record that the jury convicted Adnan Syed on.
And I hope this also demonstrates to you that this case is not as complicated as people want you to believe. And we fed into that. We did 14 episodes on this case. But today, we've recited to you the most important evidence in less than 30. This case is actually pretty straightforward. It's the straightforward case of a jilted lover who murdered his ex-girlfriend. That's the story, and the evidence backs that up. And when you hear people arguing that Adnan should be exonerated and he should be released, I want you to remember that. It's one thing to say he's been in prison for 20 years, he was 17 when this happened, he's turned his life around. That's one thing. But to deny Hay justice by allowing Adnan Syed to claim he is innocent when he is not is another victimization of her and her family, and we should not let it happen. If you have other questions about this case, you can listen to our 14-part series or use these links as a starting point. Some of these links send you to certain pages in the 2,000-page case file. If you want to, you can read that entire case file. You can read the police reports. You can read the interviews of witnesses. You can read Jay's story. You can read Jen's story. The statements they gave to the police. You can see it happen. Do that. If you want to know the truth, you got to work for it, and I hope that you will. Alice, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off today?
No, this is, like you said, not a complicated case, and this might be the shortest episode we've ever recorded in our history of both podcasts, and that should tell you something about the relative simplicity and straightforwardness of the facts.
All right, guys. Well, we look forward to your questions and thoughts. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.